I'm so glad to have you here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an instructor with the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program, and it is my honor and privilege to talk with experts in this field, people who actually have worked with students and families and apply the different principles and things that we learn and we practice as advisors working with students. And today I'm so pleased and honored to have Anne Marano, who is the executive director for the Colleges That Change Lives. She has a lot of experience and knowledge in working with students in lots of different capacities and types of schools and situations. So welcome, Anne. I'm so glad to have you here today.
So glad to be in conversation with you. Thanks, Cindy.
And that's what we want to do is have a conversation and talk about what does it take to work with students. What are some of your experiences if you work with them, and especially from a diversity inclusive perspective. Unfortunately, right now that has become almost a dirty word, which makes my heart sad. It's an area I've served in many years. I know you have too. I worked with students through all the public schools I worked with were Title I schools in Central area. Many have highly immigrant populations. We have a lot of migrant students and just phenomenal students and families in our communities. And I think that's some of the message that we need to get. And that's where your voice and what you have to share really brings that out. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your program and what your experience has been?
Sure. So I have been the executive director at Colleges That Change Lives for 3 years. And prior to that, I spent the greater portion of 30 years as a school-based college counselor in a variety of different school environments. I also dabbled in college admissions. I did some work with my alma mater, Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. I feel like I need to give them a shout out. And it's still the only Catholic women's college west of the Mississippi. I went to a high school that was facilitated or run, I guess, staffed by the same religious order, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. And I'm a first generation college grad. Didn't really know what I was doing. I knew from a young age that I had to go to college. That was the expectation. But I was one of those kids who could have really benefited from a lot of extra attention and guidance because I didn't know what I was doing. And I figured I would just go to the local community college, which would have been great. That's a terrific option. But the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet were having none of that. And so they directed me to Mount St. Mary's in Los Angeles. Anyway, and I bring that all up just to say, well, I guess we'll talk about why I brought all that up later. But I'm really glad that I landed there. They're the ones who set me on a path in this field. And so after I graduated, because I so loved the college and the work that I'd been doing there, primarily with historically historically underserved, but I don't like that word, but historically ignored maybe is a better word.
Underrepresented.
Yeah, yeah, population. So first gen kids, students from BIPOC backgrounds, students who were from low socioeconomic backgrounds, immigrant students, undocumented students, like and women to a certain extent, women in the sciences. I felt really excited to be working with those populations and called to do that. And so after 3 years in the admissions office doing great stuff there, I think it was suggested to me that I might want to consider moving over to the high school side. So I did that for a minute, for several years, and then ended up working for two of the California state universities before I immigrated to the great state of Texas and landed at a Title I public leadership magnet school for girls, the first all-girls public school in the state of Texas, the Irma Lerma Rangel Young Women's Leadership School. And I was there 12 years and then moved into my gig with CTCL. And I think everything happens for a reason. And I would not have been, I think, as happy or grounded or successful, and would not have had all of the tools and programs and things to share with the students and families at Marano had I not walked the way I did through my experience at Mount St. Mary's and then through the other colleges that I worked in. Primarily the California states, I think, were a great learning space to work with different populations of students coming from different academic backgrounds, and getting really sensitive to what student-centered college counseling looks like. And
Hmm.
certainly the young women that I got to work with at Rangel still are phenomenal human beings, but taught me a lot about what it means to show up and be present for someone and their history. And I'll stop because I don't want to get too carried away, but you and I can talk for hours about that, you know. I think that's
We,
at the heart of it, you know, no matter what kind of student you're working with, but particularly with students who have not had access or who have not grown up in a culture of college going,
Mhm.
whose families just don't have the information, where it's not a part of their daily kind of practice or ethos or experience, who may be growing up in communities where that's not been supported, you know, where they've been told that they're not college material. It makes that student-centered approach even more powerful and worthwhile and meaningful and something to really to put into play. So
Yeah, for sure. Or they, it's like the women, it's like women don't go to college, only the men, or just, yeah, not only do women not go to college, women don't need to worry about an education,
no.
that,
And if
that,
you did go to college, you know, and God love my parents, but you know, when you grow up, from my experience, growing up in a first generation college going family, and it was the 80s, my
Mhm.
mom and dad both said, go get a degree in business, nursing, or education,
Oh,
because the end
mhm.
was definite and something that was well defined, right? You can be a nurse, you can be a teacher, or you can go into business, which at that point, you know, there was a lot of opportunities for things. And I'm thinking of all the, anyway, padded jackets, shoulder pads, big hair, Melody Griffith movie, Working Girl. Anyway, make your way in the world as a business major. And when I told
Mhm.
them I wanted to study English and sociology, they both lost their minds. But I'm a Renaissance, like I'm a liberal arts kid, and I thought I was going to write the next great American novel, which is a whole other story. But
Mhm.
um, little did I know, or soon I quickly discovered how you could parlay those two things into now what has become a 35-year career in higher education.
Right,
What? Right.
right.
But my parents didn't get that. So part of I think working with women or underrepresented folks is introducing them to their own personal power, their options, reframing the conversation around what's possible, and you know, reminding women that you can go into STEM, you can kick butt in STEM. You know, like you don't have to pigeonhole yourself, and that's true for all students, but
Very true.
primarily for those groups that we were talking about. So
So now that
yeah.
you have this background and you can look back at these years and your journey, what have you learned that you wish you knew before?
Um, One of the first things that pops into my head, Cindy, is that with any student or family or colleague that you're working with, um, or a new role that you take on, it's okay not to get it right the first time, or that to give yourself grace that remember that you're a work in progress. I think when I first moved into my role at Rangel, I thought, well, I've done college counseling. I've been an admissions counselor. I'm an experienced, seasoned college counselor. I got this. And I was pretty humbled in that first week, realizing, oh, this is a whole other level of being student centered. And I learned a lot about family engagement in that role. And I think it's okay not to get it right the first time. Like you have to get to know the culture of the situation that you're in, the resources that you have available to you, get into a mindset where a growth mindset, right? Where you're always learning and trying new things and getting back up when something doesn't work really well. And I think it takes a couple of years to figure that out in a new situation or with that first time you encounter maybe someone from a background that you've not worked with before. You know, you stay humble, you learn as much as you can, you ask questions when it's appropriate, and then you build on that experience for that next student and family. And you find like by just I don't know, being open to the possibility of learning and being sensitive to admitting, I don't know, this is new territory for me. Most students and families will be lovely and super supportive and appreciate the fact that you're curious and also don't present yourself as somebody who's got it all locked down. You know, like, let me give you an example that might make sense. just very quickly, like I didn't grow up in an immigrant family, right? Um, I don't want to ever say to a student and family like, "Oh, I totally understand that," because I don't. But I want to learn from you, and what you are willing to share with me then helps me inform, okay, where we can go next in your college journey, and then benefits the next student and family comes after you. So that was a 20-minute answer to a 2-minute question. But I mean, I think that's one overall, that's one thing I wish I would have known. Like, just be patient with yourself, and you're not going to get it right. You'll get a lot right the first time. You're not going to get it all right the first time, and that's okay.
Well, I think that fits in with my message as an instructor and a teacher and as a coach is you don't have to know it all off from the get-go because there is no way to know it all, especially in this profession because everything is always changing and things are shifting, but you know how to find out and being sensitive to your students and their circumstances, being willing to ask questions and not come in with that persona of I'm your savior. I'm also a
Right.
first gen student, and I my parents didn't even know what questions to ask. My dad said, "Well, I can't afford to send you to college, so you can go, but I can't pay for it." So I knew I was on my own,
Yeah.
and then my counselor lost my application, so
No.
yes. And so
Good.
I've told this story a few times, but I literally had to petition the president of the University of Colorado Boulder to get into college. And I was 17. I was still basically, I graduated early. So I was a senior in high school and I had to go to the president because my high school counselor lost my application. So it's a long story, but
That's
being that
important.
advocate, but
Yeah.
and not, yeah, you don't have to know it all. So I think that's an important message that you still have something to contribute. Knowing and learning and like taking the courses, getting experience, doing the practicums, all of that is key, but you still have something to offer. So tell us about your experience in running a college counseling office. What are some ways you created an inclusive environment for the students and the parents? What are some things you can recommend?
I think getting information from parents and students before you launch into a bunch of programming is super important. And I learned that the hard way, right? So it's like, all right, we're going to plan out our programming calendar for the year. We're going to avoid major holidays. We're going to try to be sensitive to holidays from different religious traditions and other, cultural heritage traditions and that sort of thing. Um, Maybe avoid Mondays and Fridays. But did we ask students and families what days, nights, formats would work best for them at the get-go? No. Did that affect attendance? Definitely. So I think checking in with them, right, to recognize some of the families that you're working with and the students that you're working with may have work commitments and work responsibilities, sibling care, those sorts of things. And so, what I learned pretty quickly is we're going to offer the session, the workshop, the program, whatever it is, multiple times at multiple days, multiple times. We're going to provide childcare for families who are working, and you can't always do that. It depends on your resources. If you've got a good handle on student service groups that can provide that kind of support, that helps, or you can create a network of family volunteers, parent volunteers that are willing to watch kids because they're not of the age where they would be going to the workshop. That's another thing. Um, Offering materials, whether they are, and I'm thinking back too because there wasn't an internet when I started in this business, but now there is. So printed material seems like so archaic to say, but making sure whatever materials you have to distribute, that you're publishing on a website, that you're sending out through text messages, um, again, using the resources that you have available to you, and there are a lot of free ones that you can tap into, or networks of support that you can tap in to do this, but making sure that those are offered in the languages that your families and students are most comfortable speaking. Um, and you might even work with someone from the community to help you craft messages that make more sense. Because that's the other thing you don't have to know, right? There's no way I could possibly understand how to, well, anyway, how to communicate well across multiple languages. You might be bilingual or trilingual, but it's okay if there are multiple languages in your community and you can't communicate in all of them. Use your resources. So, consulting families and students on the best times for meetings, offering various meeting times, repeating that information. Now, in this age of technology, making that information available in in other ways too. So, if you've got a website, if there's a chat text, wherever you
Mhm.
store information for families to access later, newsletters, parent advisory groups or student advisory groups. We also created networks of support. So, and I may or may not have shared this in conversation with you before, but I relied pretty heavily, leaned heavily on alumni of whatever
Mhm.
school I was working at to come back and share their experience, particularly those that could speak to first gen, BIPOC, underserved, all of those things, diverse populations, because like speaks to like, and there's nothing more effective, I think, than peer to peer work. Scripted sometimes, I
Mhm.
would set them
Mhm.
loose entirely on their own. But I would bring them back for programming and then also bring back alumni parents to share their experience because that like speaks to like. And we created kind of a comadres network where I knew that, these moms, or you could say, your um, however you wanted to label it. But for us, we really empowered the women, the moms in our schools. Um, but if there were a number of them that were feeling particularly confident and accomplished, having gone through the process with a child, inviting them then to mentor another mom or moms or lead conversations. So those were some of the things that we did.
That sounds great. And I think that that is really important to realize you don't have to, it goes back to what we were just saying before. You don't have to do it all yourself, and bringing in those peers. In our AVID program, we'd always bring back, I mean, our tutors were also mentors. They were often past students, AVID students,
Yeah.
and bringing them in as alumni. I went through the same thing you did, like speaks to like. I love that phrase because, and here's where I'm at, and here's how you can do it. It's so powerful. And we had parent academies that we would use, and so they would go through the training, and then they'd bring in other parents and train them. And exactly as you said, they can talk to them in their language, they can talk to them from the cultural perspective, they can share a message way more powerful and impactful than I could as a counselor, as an advisor. So,
And they'd be great liaisons too, right? Like sometimes it
mhm,
was such a terrific way to get information. Not that I was using them to be stealth about anything, but it would be great because, Senora Martinez would let me know that, oh, Senora Gonzalez or Senora Tesorio was feeling a certain way about something, and maybe didn't quite know how to ask the question. So they could facilitate conversations or serve as liaisons.
mhm,
And the third day of the senior camp that I always did at Rangel, my last school, was Parent University. And that's when we imported the greatest number of talent to facilitate workshops and things. We also partnered with local colleges and universities
mhm.
who may have had really flourishing DEI efforts on their campus or multicultural recruitment efforts that were super strong. And that depends on the area and the state that you're in and what kind of support there exists for that, or if your state is legislating against those sort of things. I won't go down that road, but that can prove to be an obstacle. But if you've connected in your network with folks that are doing it at the college level, partnering with them is also fantastic. But that third day of the parent university, and I've shared this with you, Cyndy, our parents, the students that went through the camp all got a diploma, and so did the parents and the families.
Yeah.
And for some of them, it was the first diploma they'd ever received because they had come to us with, limited formal education from their home countries, but a lot of lived experience, which we validated. And we wanted them to know that they had accomplished something, and that it still makes me squishy. Even to talk about it chokes me up. We wanted to acknowledge the commitment that they'd made, that they showed up, that they participated, and that they were a really, really important piece of their child's college going experience, even if they didn't have that experience themselves. And now that they had this experience and knowledge going through our parent university, they could share it with another parent, they could pass it on. And I can't tell you how many times I got pictures back of their refrigerators at home or their living rooms, or like where they kept all their most important family pictures or documents. They would frame this thing, the diploma. They would share it with guests when they came over. I mean, it was kind of a big deal. So I'm glad you reminded me of that we did that. But,
Oh, I totally agree. I think that's a great concept. I think for especially when you're working with first gen or underrepresented families, immigrant families, the parents need it as much or more so than the students because it's always a family process.
yep.
It's always the family sending the child to college. And they do come with expectations, just as you were saying about your parents saying, here, these are the 3 degrees. I remember one student, and I have him on my website or on my YouTube channel where I've done interviews with him. His family came over from Pakistan, and he and his sister, and his dad was always, encouraging. We came here. We came so you can get an education, and you've got to go be a doctor. So he felt that pressure over and over again. And then as I'm working with him, it's like, well, why don't you go study history? Or why don't you go study this? No, my family sacrificed to get me here, and this is what I'm going to do. And it did prove to be a challenge once he got into college. He took different routes, but bringing the family and being able to have that conversation with the parents as much as with the students was really key. So I think, and then that circles back to, the whole liberal arts versus here are the 3 different careers that you can do.
Right.
So when you're working with families or communicating with students, how do you define for them what best fit is? How do you bring that concept up and help them expand their concept of, there's more than 3 majors or 3 schools. Like if you don't go to ABC, you're done. You'll never be anything. So how do
Right.
you,
I've never heard of that school, so it can't be any good.
right.
Or how about this, which is sick and twisted in the frontal lobe of most of the young people that we work with? Um, that might be a bit of a stereotype. But when they say, well, if I can get in, so if the admission rate is higher, it
Mm-hmm.
must not be a great school, right? So there's this
Mm-hmm.
equalizing, more selective automatically means stronger academics, better outcomes, better earning potential, all of that stuff. And it's like, how do you bust those myths? I mean, for me, I always took the conversation back to being more reflective. So, what is it that you have enjoyed or what stood out about your educational experience over the last 12 years? I don't know. Some students, it's hard to go all the way back to kindergarten, but particularly the last school I was at, we had them 6th through 12th grade, right? So it was like, let's think about some of the highlights that you've experienced. When did you feel particularly inspired, connected, challenged, supported? What experience do you have outside of the classroom? Well, I mean, you can start inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom, where were the areas where you got excited and involved in something? How did you spend your time? Were you working? Did you start a club? Did you join a club? Did you rise in the leadership ranks in that club or organization? What brought you joy, right? Academically, what are the things that you are curious about? Let's move away from connecting the dots right off the bat to must study this because it leads to this, which will lead to this, like my grand plan from 17 to 85. Which I know freaks some parents out, but let's go right to what are you curious about? Were there classes that you wish you would have spent, that the instructor would have spent more time on a certain subject? Did you ever lose track of the time engaged in independent study? What rabbit holes do you fall down? How do you think you learn best? You
Mm-hmm.
like being surrounded by people who ask questions? Do you like to ask questions? Do you like to get into conversations? Do you like to get into conversations that spill out into the hallway? Um, and then I think showing students and families, well, there's a lot of myth busting. First, busting the myths of the scarcity. The scarcity myth is the first one I like to bust about. The fact that a lot of folks think, well, there's only so many spaces in college because we hear the statistics every spring about the
Right.
crazy low admission rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
So saying, that the majority of colleges in this country admit the majority of students who apply, and that's great because it means access to opportunity, right? So all those things that you just shared with me, positive experiences, growth times that you thought were great, the activities that you were able to engage in, the moments that brought you joy, the things that you're curious about. Let's start to think about where you might be able to access that same or different experience if you want to do something completely different. And it may not be at those schools that everybody talks about. Shocker. Let's break apart the myth of the rankings. Are the rankings that everybody talks about and that a lot of our beloved institutions of higher education use in their publications, are those rankings evaluating and measuring the things that matter most to you?
Right.
Let's
Right.
bust them apart, right? Because if they're not, what are the things that you value? How closely do you want to work with your faculty? What kind of environment are you looking for? What kind of vibe are you looking for on campus? What sort of co-curricular, extracurricular, if you want to call them that, but high impact educational experiences, things like research and study abroad and internships, collaborative work, working in teams, how many working on campus, externships, co-ops, how many of those things are being evaluated and valued by a rankings list that you're looking at? If they're not, if you don't really care about faculty salaries, uh,
Mhm.
or understand, not that you don't care, but you know what I mean? Or if the ranking is really evaluating how many students on campus were admitted with a certain SAT score, if that's not a value that you hold, or, make sure you understand what they're measuring when it says that they're looking at faculty resources. Well, by faculty resources, do they mean the spaces, the labs, the actual like equipment that faculty and students get to use, or are they talking more about, like I said, tenure or salary? Like weigh that. So busting up the rankings or understanding what goes into them is also great. And then outcomes data,
Mhm.
pure and simple. I think some colleges and universities don't brag enough, but I think taking students to the alumni pages, to institutional research, to contacting career centers, whatever it takes to find out, okay, what can I do with a history major? What have your students done, right? How are you getting your students involved in the world outside of the classroom? What opportunities do I have access to? And are there prerequisites for those opportunities? Because I think a lot of times some of the schools that maybe people talk about all the time that dominate the narrative, um, people, you have to maybe already be in a certain situation as a student academically and otherwise to access those opportunities. Whereas there are a lot of colleges where there's more access for everybody because, we're all a work in progress. And most of us do not live in the top 10% of the class. There's 90% of the class also, but that 90% of the class has a lot of potential and talent, right? Intellectual curiosity. And so, yeah, my next thing would be to really encourage students and families. All right, let's look at, if you're interested in that, what are your chances of getting involved in it? Because I think that says a lot more to a student and
Mhm.
family about whether or not it's going to be a best fit place. I want you to find your next best home, a community that's going to nurture you, challenge you, uplift you, and also provide those opportunities for you. And I don't care how much play they get in the press. If you can't access the stuff that school's bragging about that makes it special, why everybody goes, "Ooh, that school." And I'm in a mood today, so I apologize. But if you can't access that stuff, that's not going to be a great space for you. That's just going to be frustrating for you, right? So let's find you a place that's going to value you as an individual person. How do we know
Mhm.
that they do that? By talking to current students. You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
what's your relationship with your faculty like? What's your relationship like when you need help from someone in the student accounts office? Pay attention to how you're treated throughout the admissions process by all the different people that you encounter. That says a lot about the place.
Yep.
And then yeah, going back to how do you access those opportunities? What are the I was going to say touch points or expectations or barriers maybe that a school has set up, like, oh no, you already have to qualify, pre-qualify. It's like, oh, what? Okay, well then maybe that's not the place for you. um, it's hard to get folks out of that mentality of there are only six places where I can go where I'm going to be successful, right? And so You have to be shameless and pull down ROI data. Like, let's look at the earning power of a liberal arts grad, right? And the stats all show us that liberal arts grads catch up. Maybe that first gig out of college, you may not be earning as much as somebody in another field. But career over the course of your career, you're going to catch up. And as a matter of fact, do sometimes even better.
Uh,
It's controversial. Um, anyway,
well,
that's a lot.
and I mean, it's shifting that whole mindset about what a best fit is, and as you said, busting those myths. And the comment I would make is that applies to international students just as much as it does. And I know sometimes with an international perspective, it's even more difficult to bring that awareness and build that understanding with the families that are being served and sending their students. And the American system is so different from like the UK or other systems that the whole holistic best fit is a very foreign concept.
Right.
So
Right.
it takes even more.
Yeah, because the thinking is, and I mean, a lot of families and students will do this, right? I Google top 10 programs for, but that's the
Mhm.
other thing. That's if you subscribe to the myth that a student needs to know what they want to do with the rest of their life at 17, which I do not. I
Right.
celebrate the multi-decided, right? Because I don't use undecided in my practice. But you're right. I mean, that it's very easy or not, can be more confusing just to Google, okay, top 10 programs for X, and then think that's definitely where I need to go. Those are the ones that are going to pay off. It takes a little more of a deep dive. And then that's another great place to use your alumni, right? Particularly
Mhm.
the ones who went into majors that people would go, oh, really? And you can be self-sustaining with that, um,
Mhm.
uh, to tell their stories. And if you don't think that I pull those out all the time, I definitely do. Because
Well,
anyway.
thank you. We just have a few more minutes left, but I want you to explain a little bit about, for those that don't know what CTCL is, can you explain what that is and talk about the mission and where they can go to learn more?
Fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity to share. So I've been a fan of the colleges that change lives since I was a baby college counselor, even before the book was written, if you could believe that. In 1996, Lauren Pope wrote a book called The Colleges That Change Lives, and that followed two other publications that he had written, and one of them was Looking Beyond the Ivy League. But Lauren was a writer, who was an education writer for several publications that you may have heard of, like the Washington Post and the New York Times. He was also one of the first independent educational consultants in this country,
Wow.
and kind of a renaissance man in a whole bunch of different areas. But through his practice, he had become, and because of his own undergraduate experience at DePaul University, he'd become enamored of the liberal arts and sciences as an academic tradition, and a big fan of the schools that didn't get as much attention as the schools that everybody talks about. And he believed that it was through the liberal arts and sciences and best fit and a student-centered approach to college counseling and looking primarily at smaller schools. That was his first love. That students, particularly those that weren't at the tippy top of the class, but all students definitely, could have access to educations that would launch them in ways that rivaled and sometimes even superseded the experiences that students had at the schools that everybody talked about. And so it was his mission to uplift and highlight those schools. So he published the book in 96, where he amplified or put a spotlight on 40 smaller liberal arts and sciences colleges that didn't exist in the spotlight. And he called it The Colleges That Change Lives. 40 schools, and I'm paraphrasing, forgive me, but 40 schools you should know about, especially if you're not an A or B student, right? So he was trying to get to like, there's an opportunity for all students to do really well and to have similar experiences and access to internships and research and close mentoring relationships with faculty, and to be engaged with faculty that teach. Those 40 schools started traveling together in 1998, to spread the message about not just their schools, but to continue to spread, forgive me for the religious overtones, the gospel of Lauren Pope, but around a student-centered search, the concept of how do we help you find your next best fit? How do we help direct you and your family to a community that makes the most sense for you, where you're going to be supported, nurtured, challenged, have access to folks who really care about you and look at you as an individual student, and to all of those other things that we think are going to help you develop as a leader and a world changer. Oh, yeah. And by the way, you'll also be able to support yourself in work, in a career, in a vocation that you find particularly satisfying. That's really why the schools got together to start travel. Sure, it was a recruiting thing, but it was more about the student-centered approach. We need to get away from the hype and the anxiety and the rankings frenzy, and we need to put the student back in our eye line in terms of conversation. And then, because the story is taking too long, because I get kind of excited, the schools formed an organization. So we've been since 2006 a nonprofit, and our mission is to spread the good news about a student-centered search. And that's our mission, is to educate students, families, and those that advise them on the way to college on how to do a search that's all about the student, that's highly personal, that speaks to their values, wants, and needs. Oh, and by the way, if you'd also like to consider the liberal arts, we believe in those too. And here are now 43 schools that we think are particularly special, and do all of those things and deliver on a great promise really, really well. So we host national events. We go on 3 national tours a year, where we will host information sessions and college fairs featuring our member institutions. And we're in 22 to 25 cities a year. We also pull together individual programming for schools and school districts, for independent educational consultants, for community-based organizations. We partner with them to offer programming. The newsletter is making a comeback, so stay tuned. We have a brochure called How to Choose a College That's Right for You. It's mostly directed at the student and how to do a college search that's all about them. And then there's a tiny little page of information about the colleges that change lives. And that's kind of what we do in a rather large nutshell. um,
Oh, that sounds great. And I don't know that I knew about the brochure, so I'll have to look that up and I'll have to download it and added that to the resources. So,
yeah,
and
so
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if you visit ctcl.org, you can learn more about the member schools, about our programming, and then also have access. There's a PDF version of the How to Choose brochure if you do a little digging on the website. But we're happy to send those out to folks if they want paper copies. You can also book a speaker, because we're all about that. So.
Yes, and I've presented with several different CTCL people, including yourself. So it is always an honor and a privilege, and I appreciate being able to share that message from the small college liberal arts perspective. I started out obviously at the University of Colorado Boulder, which was a great school. I mean, it's a great school, but that wasn't a good fit for me. And then I ended up at a smaller school, and I finally graduated from a small liberal arts school. So I've been to all kinds of colleges, and that's what you want to find, the ones that's good, because as you said, everybody's learning style is going to be different, and just, there's so much in terms of all of that. So thank you again. I appreciate your time and appreciate all the work you do, and appreciate learning more about what it takes to be a counselor and advisor in an inclusive way in the school. So thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much, Cindy. I always learn something from you every time we spend space together.